So welcome everyone to the session on the fifth aggregate, or consciousness, as we conclude the five aggregates. So we talked about the first aggregate being the body, the second aggregate being a feeling tone, feeling of pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. The third aggregate is being perception, that recognizes, labels the objects that arise. And the fourth, we explored in two different talks, the mental formations as thoughts, as well as volition or intention, which was what we explored last week. So the fifth is consciousness. And as you know, these are all the five aggregates of clinging. These are the things that the Buddha surmised that we cling to as a sense of self, right? We cling to our body, perhaps as our sense of identify with our body as being us, somebody, an I, or you can see that, or our thoughts, another common one, our intentions that lead to action. All these things that we cling to as a sense of I is really at the root of dukkha, or suffering. The consciousness perhaps is the one that is the most subtle, and perhaps the one that is the last to be seen as not self in many ways. I love practicing with this one. I really found it fruitful when I was able to practice with it this week. And that's the meditation that I offered you, is that the way that I practice with it. Whereas I just I did it with my eyes open, and I just kind of let the sensory data be. I saw that sense consciousness was recognizing and knowing all this sensory data. So sights and smells and thoughts and so on. You can just kind of see it. Like it's as soon as you're conscious of something, it's now part of your experience, right? We've talked about this, where you have a sense organ, the ear, sense object, the sound. So you've got two of the three, but that's not an experience for you because there's lots of sounds going on in the environment that you don't even know are happening. You need sense consciousness. So you need the three things: the organ, the object, and the sense consciousness. And then you have contact, and then you have automatically pleasant, unpleasant, neutral arises. And then we get into the whole craving and cycle of samsara and dukkha. So sense consciousness is basically the foundation of our experience. And it's delineated as, this in terms of the sense doors. There's eye consciousness, sound consciousness, and so on and so forth. So it's the bare knowing that manifests in some way, regardless of what is being known. It's this knowing factor. So without sense consciousness, there can be no experience. Right? Sense consciousness stops. What happens if there was no sense consciousness? Just imagine for a moment, no sense consciousness. What would happen? What would be left? Well, there's something.
Just awareness is left.
Just awareness. Yeah. There's something that knows. There's something that can be aware of sense consciousness. It can be aware of the absence of sense consciousness. So that's what I was really trying to get at. I was trying to kind of go beyond. Usually in this kind of a talk, you hear so many ways that sense consciousness is impermanent, and it's in flux, so it's not self. And I think you guys are getting that message because it's the same message on all of the aggregates. So I kind of took it a step further and to get you to really feel in what's present when sense consciousness isn't there, when there's no when there's nothing being known as it comes through sense doors. So it's this mirror-like awareness. It simply reflects what comes before it. Right? All the judging and commenting, that's thoughts about what arises to sense consciousness. It's just kind of mirror-like. It's just reflecting. It's dependently arising. It's not something that's permanent. It arises simultaneously with objects. So it's not always present. It's only present when there's an object to be known, which is quite often in our lives, right? Because there's so many objects. Even when there's none of the five senses are perhaps being stimulated, which is pretty hard for that not to happen. There's still the mind producing thoughts, which is the sixth sense in the Buddha's way of talking about this. And it does have an illusion of continuity, though, right? Because there's so much happening, but it's a process happening so quickly. It seems like it's constant, but it is distinct, a knowing of a piece of sensory data, you could say. That it is just each sense object is known by sense consciousness. So like the other aggregates, it's insubstantial, it's impermanent, it's conditioned. The Buddha, remember the analogies we used, the mirage, and this one, it's a hollow tree. It's substantial as a hollow tree, and it kind of points to, it kind of looks like it's more permanent, but when you sort of cut into the tree, into a banana tree or a plantain tree, you see that there's no core to it. I'm going to play a cool little talk, little short video here. Russell Brand and Sam Harris. Let me just, Paula's here. Let me just admit Paula. Hi, Paula. Okay, I'm just about to play a video.
If we can somehow.
Oh, let me just start that. Turn the volume up. Okay. I'm going to share this.
If we can somehow.
Okay. Got it.
Extract what is positive from what is called religion, that it leads us to ideas such as fraternity, unity, oneness, compassion, and like with your, do you not find connections between what you have learned in neuroscience and what you have learned from studying sort of Buddhism?
Oh yeah, the connections are very direct, but
how they know that stuff?
But we don't want, well, just because it's just the nature of consciousness. You're talking about people who have spent, especially in the Buddhist case, just an incredible amount of time studying from the first person side what experience is like, what its character is. The central claim of Buddhism is not just Buddhism, but Buddhism, and I would put several of the Indian traditions like Advaita Vedanta in there, with the central claim is that the self is an illusion, the ego is an illusion. And when I say self, I don't mean that people are illusions. I mean that the sense that you have a subject riding around in your head, thinking your thoughts, right? That there's a thinker in addition to the thoughts. That's an illusion.
Yes.
And that makes perfect sense neurologically. There's no place in the brain for your ego to be sitting. There's no place where everything comes together. There's no changing center in the brain. You're just talking about a cascade of neurophysiology, and everything's distributed everywhere. And it's not and there are various parts of the brain that are coming online and off and subserving conscious states and not. It's a process, and if you could experience consciousness as a flow of sensory and emotional and interoceptive experience without the sense that there's an unchanging center riding around on that flow, right? Like a man in a boat on the stream of consciousness.
Yes, yes.
If you could experience that consciousness without that, that would be an experience that is much more coincident with what we understand neurologically. That would be to experience something that is more true from the third person brain-based, what do we see inside the head side. And it just so happens you can experience that. That is what meditation is like when you really know how to meditate. This sense that there's a meditator in the head strategically paying attention to experience rather than just pure experience, that drops away, right? So that's one piece of data in favor of introspection here. And it's not a piece that the Western intellectual tradition or the Western spiritual tradition ever got a good handle on. I mean, so yes, you can find specific Christian and Jewish and Muslim mystics making these noises, but when they make these noises sufficiently, they start to sound like Buddhists, and their co-religionists want to kill them rather often, right?
Yes, and not only the co-religionists, the powerful entities within nation states and economic entities. Like if people start believing they're not individuals, it's very hard to market at them.
Yeah. I just thought that was an interesting dialogue with Russell Brand and Sam Harris, two characters in the spiritual world, talking about consciousness. So he's pointing out to the selfless nature of consciousness and of all the experience that's unfolding for us. So one of the things with these aggregates is we investigate them, right? So again, we're not just hearing me say that it's not self, but that you in your meditation practice and in your daily life practice, so your formal and informal practice, you see how this is true in your experience. So one way is with sustained mindfulness. You can see the arising of objects and see the knowing of that object. You can actually see that moment by moment. And if your mind gets fairly settled, you can, when there aren't so many objects that are the sense data, I guess, lessons, or at least your enchantment with the sense data lessons. I like that word, enchantment, because we are in a way enchanted with our sense data. When there isn't any, we kind of go out looking for it. Like, what's going to happen if there isn't all kinds of sense data? It's really quiet. This can almost feel uneasy sometimes. So we with sustained mindfulness, we can see the arising of objects and the knowing of objects. And that knowing of the objects is your sense consciousness that just flows with objects. Another way, and Joseph Goldstein talks about this, is to reframe our experience in a passive voice. So you take the I out of the description. So instead of saying, I hear a sound, it's a sound is being known. Or I had a thought, it's a thought is being known. So it just points to the flow of objects being known by sense consciousness. This continuous flow of objects being known. And you can experience this in walking meditation. We talked about walking meditation and last week, and you can see this very clearly in walking meditation. As we take a step, we can notice a couple of things. We can notice that each moment of knowing, of consciousness, is arising simultaneously with the sensation, right? Not a moment before, not a moment after. Each moment of knowing, each moment of consciousness is arising simultaneously with the sensation that you feel on the sole of the foot, for example, as you're doing walking meditation at that precise moment. Secondly, we notice that knowing arises spontaneously. The knowing of objects just arises spontaneously. There's no one commanding or controlling the process. And you watch that in your walking meditation consistently for some time, and you really start to see the impermanent nature of the sense consciousness. So there's a practice I offer you for the week, is to practice some walking meditation. We played around with it with intention last session. The intention of turning, watching an intention arise and not actually engaging with that intention. Remember that one? And then just seeing how the intention to turn the other way might arise, and just seeing how intentions just arise. You can't stop them. You can't control them. They just arise. And you can see the same thing with consciousness rising spontaneously with objects as they appear. So that's I think a very direct and simple way to practice with sense consciousness. But don't underestimate the power of seeing this. Right? I think sometimes we hear the teaching like that and say, "Oh yeah, you do it a couple times. Yeah, I kind of see it's spontaneous. Yeah, I kind of see it's a flow." But to really, really know it deeply and to really sense into it is a transformative. Can have transformative insights arise. So I wanted just to quickly talk about, and this came up with some questions that occurred several weeks ago, and I kept putting off the question about, well, what's, because I sometimes use the word consciousness in place of awareness. So resting in your consciousness, resting in awareness as kind of that permanent, always there and already existing quiet and stillness. So sometimes I refer to it as consciousness, as do others, teachers and other within Buddhism and other spiritual traditions. So it gets a little confusing. Like, how is this different from the other? So I often say little c consciousness and big C consciousness, right? So little c consciousness is the sense consciousness that's impermanent, not self. And big C consciousness, what John Sumedo referred to in his talk several months ago, I guess, is always and already there. So, in other words, big C consciousness can be aware of sense consciousness, right? There's something deeper than sense consciousness. In other words, there's an awareness that is aware of sense consciousness, right? So you can really see that. So it's sometimes called pure consciousness. John Sumedo has a recent talk where he talks about pure consciousness as he delineates it from sense consciousness. Ajahn Maha, who I've spoken about before here, calls it mind released. So it's the unconditioned, perfect equanimity, quiet and stillness. So when the Buddha said there's an end to dukkha, there's a path to the cessation of dukkha, right? He's talking about more than, about us being in a good mood, right? Or kind of being peaceful even. It's nirvana is not contingent on any conditions at all for its arising. It's always there. That's why you hear people say you're already free. You just don't know it. It's because Nibbana it's not contingent on you doing anything. You just sort of clear the clouds or lift the veil and see it. And so that's the challenge is for our dualistic mind to see this, to experience the unconditioned. So some of the Buddhist texts talk about the cessation of conditioned consciousness, right? The cessation of sense consciousness. So when there's no craving or clinging to the flow of sense consciousness, right, which is conditioned by impermanent objects, it suddenly stops. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine sense consciousness suddenly stopping? When there's no craving, no struggling with what is, sense consciousness can stop. I mean, what you might sense before sensing it stopping is sensing that there's less of it. Right? When people first start to meditate, the one thing they notice is, wow, the mind's really busy and there's just all this sense data. And because you're just sitting there and you're not used to just receiving it, right? And seeing it. So over time, as you disengage from you can disengage from your enchantment with sense objects, sense consciousness diminishes and can totally stop quite suddenly. When you hear about sudden realization, sudden awakening, what this actually is sense consciousness completely stopping. So there's nothing but peace and stillness. So, when you completely let go, there's complete peace. And Ajahn Mahu Boowa, Boowa, speaks of this as the mind released. So conditioned phenomenon still do what they do, right? Appearances still go on in the world. The relative world still continues just as it ever did. But all that is felt is pure peace, or citta, as it's sometimes called. And this citta, you can actually detect it as energy in the body. So as one's enchantment with sense objects diminishes, you start to could become more in tune with the energy flows in the body, which is the citta, the prajna, the chi, the meridian, whatever, what we were tuning into when we did our somatic meditations, our body meditations. Here's a quote from Ajahn Mahabua. Even though the citta resides within the body, we are nonetheless unable to detect it. That's how very subtle it is. Because it is dispersed throughout the physical body, we cannot tell which part or which aspect is actually the true citta. It is so subtle that only the practice of meditation can detect its presence and differentiate it from all the other aspects associated with the body. Yoga, you can also get in touch very much so with the energy flow in the body. And that's the citta, that's the always and always present pure awareness is associated with this citta. Now there's this comes from, Ajahn Chah and the Thai forest tradition. A lot of the Ajahns are saying this kind of thing. There is some controversy. Of course, on the internet, there can be controversy, debate, I guess you could call it, about pretty much everything, but there's lots of discussion on Reddit and places like that, where some are saying that this contradicts the Buddha's teaching on not self, that there's no aspect of self, even citta or Buddha nature, that's permanent, that everything is impermanent. And this is giving, going outside what the Buddha taught. So I'll leave that up to you if you want to explore that and see. I go more by what I feel than by what I read on Reddit. I didn't buy GameStop stock, so people follow Reddit at all. So there's all kinds of things on Reddit, and but this is actually, I shouldn't make light of it. This is a serious discussion that's taking place between various, like I would say, more scholars, whether than perhaps practitioners. The Buddha refers to this notion of citta as being permanent in several suttas. So he says, consciousness, he refers to citta as consciousness without feature, without end, luminous. Here, water, earth, fire, and wind have no footing. Here, long and short, coarse and fine, fair, name and form are all brought to an end. With the cessation of consciousness, that's sense consciousness, each here is brought to an end. So this is the consciousness that's unconditioned, unmanifest. You could say our true nature, our Buddha nature, the mind released. So I wanted to kind of point to that. I'm not trying to convince you that this is true. It just as some way to practice, to seeing if you can sense into this sense of the unconditioned, the pure awareness, sensing, or pure consciousness can be aware of sense consciousness. And that's what I've see in my practice, that there's something deeper that is aware of sense consciousness. And you can go beneath the sensory data, and there's something else there. And when in deep meditation states, it can actually be felt energetically in the body. So I'll stop it there and open it up to questions. About that talk, about consciousness, or any of the aggregates as we leave this topic, and or anything else that's arising in your practice. Yes, Anita.
So when you were talking about sense consciousness ceasing, and if I heard you right earlier, you talked about that the sound or the sight or the smell is there, but we're not perceiving it. So that made me think of when I'm asleep. Like a skunk might be out my window, or it may be raining, but I don't smell the skunk and I don't hear the rain. Is there some, I'm wondering if that's what you're talking about, or if not so much.
Yeah, no, it's more speaking about sense consciousness stopping in the waking state. Sense consciousness in the dream state is very diminished because you're in a different state, as is all. There's 4 types of consciousness. They're all very diminished, except perhaps store consciousness, which I don't want to get into, but it is a different mind state when you're asleep. This is, sense consciousness stopping in a waking state, which it feels completely different than dreaming or a sleep state, but because you're awake, right? You're totally aware of what the appearances in the world, as opposed to appearances in a dream state. You're totally aware of the appearances in the world around you. If you can get a sense of that. So the conditioned world is continuing to manifest. It's just not penetrating into sense consciousness, because you're not, unless you need to, right? You need to navigate the world, so there will be some engagement. But because there's no craving or struggling or trying to control what's happening in the world or within you, you can completely let go of needing to be enthralled or enchanted with or entangled. The Buddha used the word entangled a lot, to disentangle ourselves from conditioned phenomenon. What he's talking about is that it coming in through the sense doors. If you get into deep samadhi concentration practices, you can really get a taste of this, where you get such a deep state that sense consciousness actually disappears. It disappears. But I mean, don't set that up as some kind of goal in your practice. It just I was just pointing to when the Buddha's talking about, the end of dukkha. This is really what he's talking about. Yeah. I'll leave it at that. Thanks. Yes, oh, madame.
Is this something, like frequently I find myself at home standing outside as a conscious one and observing the various sense consciousness, various senses. Okay, the Om standing outside, he's watching the Om conscious of seeing a scenery, seeing a tree, or listening to something. But there is another Om which is standing out, being aware of all those activities, which I don't know which one it is, the other Om is getting involved in all these things. But the other Om who is aware of all these things, is this what you were suggesting?
In your example, there are 2 ohms. There are 2 of you.
Exactly. The one which is aware of the other one. The other one is doing all those activities. He's indulging in listening, smelling, or whatever activities or whatever senses he's involved in. But me, Om, outside of this thing, is aware of these things, that all these things are happening. All right, it's happening, yes. But not really being involved in that one. Other Om is involved in these things.
So there's an Om, which is a self that is involved with the sense objects and the knowing of sense objects. Then there's something deeper that can actually see that, oh, there's a Om being enchanted by sense objects and is standing back from all that action, you could say, all that noise and movement. There's something still that can be sensed into behind all that, like the screen in the movie example I gave during the meditation. The screen is that, could be the other. It's just the background within which all the movement occurs, the sense consciousness occurs. But it wouldn't be another Om. It's just Om's true nature.
Exactly. I didn't just
Yeah.
wanted to explain it as a thought, that okay,
Yeah.
perhaps it is very similar. An actor who has acted in a film and the film is being screened. Now the real actor is watching all this thing and seeing this thing. Okay. So that actor is involved in whatever the activities are happening on the screen. But now sitting outside, he's just observing it with a bit of amusement or a bit of
Yeah.
awareness that okay.
Yeah. So we can rest in that background awareness that the whole show, that all the appearances appear on within, through, whatever the word is, I guess more through. Life manifests through us or as us. So you're just noticing life manifesting as us.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Hmm. Of course, the first, I want to say step, but the first investigation is really to see how we cling to sense consciousness. How we're very enchanted. I like the word enchanted. We're enchanted with sense consciousness, and we cling to it as a sense of self. We're very identified with what's arising as experience, our sensory experience. So that would be the first step in this. And then, dipping below that is also a very, we've done that practice a lot, dipping below that sense experience and seeing what you see. Yeah. See what's there.